It started. Thank
Well,
you.
welcome everybody to the March Finance Committee meeting. Right now it's about 6:02 p.m. on March the 10th. And I'd like to start a roll call. So I will start with, I'll go from my screen from left to right. Glenn Rogers.
Here.
Peter.
Here.
Doug.
Here.
Ethan's here, and I believe Delano should be joining shortly. So we have everybody's here. At this time, I'd like to ask for public comments, and if you can, just limit to 3 minutes per person. So if anybody has public comments, please raise your hand, and Sai can mute you, or if I don't think we put a full mute, but if you can, to unmute yourself, and Sai will allow you 3 minutes to speak.
Any public comments?
Let's give 1 or 2 more minutes.
Mhm.
If anybody's having any technical difficulties, but we are open for public comments at this time. Okay, looks like we have no public comments at this time.
I'm sorry.
Edwin, just
Can
Edmund, please go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just popped on. I just wanted to ask this one question, or I just pose it to you. I know you guys might not be able to discuss it, but I keep hearing that the PTO had sent some finances, a donation or some sort, a while back for what the PTO expected as money for TAs. However, I guess after at the time there was no TA money.
Edmund, can you hold 1 second, please? Can everybody mute? Wonderful. Edwin, apologies, please continue.
Okay. No problem. Thank you. Yeah, so I guess they sent some a donation. They approved a donation for TAs because at the time there was supposedly no money for TAs. And then somehow that came about where there was some for the TAs. And I just keep hearing that the PTO has been asking for that either to be moved towards a nurse, which a lot of parents have asked for, or to just have it sent back so the PTO can use those funds for something else. So I'm not sure if the finance committee is the group to discuss that or consider that, or if that's for the regular IIA board, but I just wanted to kind of put that out there, that I know that that's been something that's been discussed for a while. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Edwin. I have a question for you, Doug. Am I allowed to respond to this request?
It's your prerogative. You
Okay.
can, sure.
Well, wonderful. Edwin, much appreciated. I'm not sure, actually I spent time responding back to the PTO's request today. In general, it is regarding, there are some moving parts to it. Actually, it may or may not relate to also the Hoag's email, which I did respond just a few minutes ago. I may have given you inaccurate information, and I deeply apologize. So I'm going to be spending even more time to really get down to the situation. Regarding the grant situation, the PTO did give a $44,000 pledge, of which $21,000 has been given to school already. Those funds have and will be only used for TAs. As it relates to the other $23,000, I have given guidance to that this needs to be discussed with the administration. But from a finance committee perspective, we also would like clarity, because I don't want to be putting in the budget that there's money there, but there's money not. Right now, because it's in limbo, it's being sort of removed from the budget itself, but It is the prerogative of the donor. To me, the remaining $23,000 belongs to the donor. If they want to change it midstream into another expense, such as a nurse, that's complete the prerogative of the donor. I hope the administration does understand that the donor's intent and respects it as well. I have given some advice about consideration about how to structure the remaining $23,000 as it relates to the nurse. Edwin, I'll be more than happy to forward the email to you as well. But the entire team of the PTO team was received the email today. Again, this belongs to the donor. It is donor, so is considered restricted. And again, if there's any changes made of this grant midstream, not just for finance committee, but I'm sure transparency throughout the entire organization, it needs to be documented with absolute clarity, signed and also countersigned by both the donor and administration. Edwin, actually, I'm not going to try to put you on the spot. I'm hoping, is that okay with you, or would you like to take it? We can discuss further now, or we can also take it offline as well. What would you like, Edwin?
Oh, no, that was more than enough of a response. I didn't even expect that. So I appreciate that, Ethan. And in terms of that being a PTO thing, you saying that you've already sent that to them, I was kind of just asking on their behalf. So if you sent it to them, I don't need that. I am not the donor, so that's perfectly fine. Thank you.
Wonderful. Much appreciated. And again, Edwin, I will be responding to you with complete and accurate information shortly. Thank you so much. Are there any other public comments? Okay, so we're now closing the public comments. We're going to closed session. There is no closed session. So we can now proceed to do the Pledge of Allegiance. So I will start. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, for liberty and justice for all. And how wonderful to say those words in times of where we are still dealing with national crisis. And blessings to all those who have been affected overseas. At this time, I'd like to move to approve the last minutes, so if everybody can look at the last meeting minutes. There was some unfortunate spelling errors, but please forgive us on this.
Doug will move to approve the minutes.
I'll second it, Ethan.
Wonderful. Peter has a motion, Glenn has second. Can we go for roll call? So Glenn?
Actually, Doug, Ethan, Doug motioned it. No,
Oh, excuse me.
Just
Doug
FYI,
motioned.
so we're taking the right notes. Okay.
Wonderful. Glenn?
I'm in favor, so that's your next gesture.
Peter?
Same.
Doug?
Yes.
Ethan, yes. It passes unanimously. Wonderful.
Yes. Miller.
Miller, this is a Miller, this is a
Miller, you're
finance
welcome
committee.
to attend, but you're not a voting board
Oh.
person for the finance meeting.
Oh, I didn't know that. Sorry. I just
That's
said
okay.
that. Okay. Sorry. I'm fully support you all. Okay, I'm here. Listen.
Thank you,
okay?
Miller. Appreciate it.
Wonderful.
I'm sorry.
Also, now I'd like to approve the next meeting's procedures. Again, we're going to be conducting by allowed to have for Zoom. Is to vote to approve the meeting by abbreviated teleconferencing procedures for another 30 days according to Assembly Bill 361 and Government Code 54953 E1. But before we approve it, maybe I should start for the last meeting minutes, are there any public comments specific to this approval only?
Ethan, just a general question. Do we know if it's going to go beyond 30 days or is it currently just a 30-day window?
I am unsure right now. I do know right now there might be some consideration to bring it back in person.
Okay.
But we'll bring it back to the board.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, it will be your choice to be in person or by Zoom. And it's not a 30-day limit. It's just what you're deciding for the next meeting, which will be less than 30 days.
Thanks, Michael.
Are there any public comments? I'm scanning. Can we get a motion to approve the next meeting's procedures?
Yeah, Doug will move to, oh, you got it, Glenn, and I'll second.
Wonderful. Glenn motions, Doug seconds. We'll do all say aye. Let's go again. Glenn,
Aye.
Peter,
Aye.
Doug,
Aye.
Ethan, aye. Unanimously passes. And for the next, right now, we have 3 items on our agenda. The first is to approve, to review and approve the second interim budget. So let's, at this time, are there any public comments before we, well, maybe the procedures? Are there any public comments before I turn it over to Delano to give an introduction regarding this? Are there?
I think we had one from Lucy.
Yes, we have one. Lucy, can you unmute yourself?
Sorry, okay. I usually very attentive in this meeting.
Got,
As a parent of 2, my 2 kids attending the IIA, the after school care money is so heavy for me. Like I feel so much worried about the payment, and I pay about, I think, $1,300 per month for my 2 kids after school care. Is
Lucy,
that
Lucy, I must, for protocol perspectives, this was available to speak about public comments. Right now, how would this revolve around the second interim budget?
Okay, so it's not relevant.
Is this regarding the budgeting for the second interim budget about payment for the after school?
Yeah. So
Oh, it's payment.
yeah.
Okay, please go ahead, Lucy.
Well, I just feel, I don't know the whole budget, but I do feel it's a lot of stress for me to pay for the 2 kids after school care fee.
Okay. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you.
Are there any other public comments? Okay. No, at this time, I'd like to ask Delano to give us an overview of the second interim budget. Delano?
All right, thank you, Ethan. Good evening, everyone. Good to see you all. Before I dive into the interim, the actuals and the budget, I kind of want to set the table with sort of walking the committee through what the interims represent, why we do them, and why it's the importance of it in transitioning as we go forward for the rest of this fiscal year and also into next school year as well. So compliance wise, the charter must produce quarterly an interim financial statement to the authorizer. Expenditures associated. First year, we want to make sure that this process is clear in terms of timeline and when interim, which covered financials from July 1 through October 31st, and that was approved back in December, on December 15th. Peter, I don't recall if you were on the committee at that time, so you may have missed that piece of it. So now this is that second iteration of that same document. We're now looking at the financials from July 1 through January 31st. So it sort of covers now a seven-month period. This one, gives a more insight and more detail into, what has transpired over the course of those 7 months. And, as I've always prefaced this to say that we're always, these reports are looking backwards, right? So, everything here will be as of January 31st, roughly 2 months ago, right? But it tells the tale of what has occurred, and it gives an opportunity for decisions to be made based upon that, right? Whether, hey, are we still in line with what we thought 7 months ago, 4 months ago? Are we still on budget? Have we extended ourselves too far? I think this committee or this body, you've seen those numbers and the details of that throughout the course of the last, say, 5 to 6 months, or say 4 to 5 months. So that's the second interim in a nutshell in terms of why we have to do it. It's a compliance report. Your authorizers will see this. They will examine it. They will provide some analysis and feedback on it. And again, there isn't the numbers don't lie. The numbers are the numbers, right? And I think we can all agree to that. But it's what they represent, right? And so, as with any entity or any business, that first year is always the toughest, because you're finding your way. It's always a struggle, and it's always the most difficult, in my opinion. But the decisions that are made this year impacts, whether you're going towards a much more stable organization or business, or if you're going to sort of limp along and continuously have issues and struggles with certain things. I hope it's the former, where we stabilize and we're moving forward based upon, decisions that are made, solid decisions that are made holistically, etc. I'll dive into it, and I believe I do have share screen capability, Mary Beth. I think I do.
Yes.
All right, perfect. Bear with me 1 second here. I'm gonna close out a few things that are not relevant, so that way it's giving me some room to operate here. All righty. And everyone see this document? So I'll start with this, and I'll walk you through it. It is not an easy document to wrap your head around if you're seeing this for the first time. In fact, it'll make you dizzy a little bit. But we will walk through this, and we'll focus on a couple of things.
Doug, can you go on mute?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm going to share with you the other one. I'm going to share with you with everyone, Ethan, the one you and I discussed today, so that way it's a little bit more clear for everyone.
Yep.
Perfect. All right. As I mentioned, this is a compliance report, right? And so there are a couple of places here that the school must certify, or this body and or the board will certify and approve this, that you've seen it, we've discussed it, and that the numbers accurately reflect what you guys are approving. As we look at this, and I'm going to make it a little bit bigger just so that way it doesn't, right? And I think you guys can all see this. All right. So the way that this is constructed, it will look at a couple of things. We'll look at your year one unrestricted interim budget, and then your restricted budget as well. It will also take your, and I'm sorry, I think I'm sharing the wrong sheet with you guys, so I think I'll go to the next one. We'll stay here. It will show your total budget, and then obviously some projections for 23, 24. I caution about giving credence to these numbers here in the out years, just because, again, you know, there's a lot of conversations that needs to be had in the next month and a half as we develop that budget. I understand that is something I'll update you guys on after we've discussed the interim report. So sort of taking a look at our total actuals, and we'll drop down here. We'll come to this page. So on this page here, this will show you our preliminary budget that was developed. You know, most people will say, well, yeah, this is the charter petition budget, you know, call it what you want there. You know, it's the original budget that was approved to go forward when we started the school year. We did a slight iteration, and much did not change when we submitted that first interim report, because quite frankly, you know, we just had actuals through October. So it did not accurately, you know, there wasn't enough, if you will, expenditures and things like that at that point for us to say, well, let's make you know, a holistic change to the budget, or just go through this thing with a knife, right? But as I mentioned to this body back in, say, November, December, as we turned that corner, you know, if you guys recall, I said, yeah, you know, chances are that as we get into that second interim, we're going to have to revise the budget, because, you know, we knew at that point then that there was this uptick in expenditures, you know, things that were necessary to sort of get the school on better footing, bring the resources to the classroom, staff, etc. So I'll focus more on this side of this spreadsheet or this report, just because, again, this information here and going to the left, it's not relevant anymore. It's no longer relevant. What's relevant are the actuals in this second interim budget that we're going to discuss. I'll start with the budget first, and I think it's safe to say that this committee understands that, you know, there were certain investments into the program, the overall program, in September, October, November, December, if you will, that was necessary, right? There were those technology that was needed, curriculum, all of those wonderful things, right? And so as a result of that, looking at the actuals and the reforecast of it, it was necessary to make changes to the budget. I'll sort of start with the revenue. Most of the revenue remains unchanged in terms of overall LCFF revenues here. Those remain unchanged. And as you can see, as you go across here, the biggest change here was the recognition of most of the roughly almost $400,000 of the PCSGP grant, right? So if you recall, this is a $600,000 grant. Most, you know, 400,000, call it almost 394, came in between July and January. So that's recognized here. So I did have the budget reflect that amount. While that's money in, money out, because that's just really reimbursement, but I wanted to at least have that reflected here in terms of showing that difference. And that's really the only change on the revenue side, was that uptick. And then obviously the grants and things like that. And I don't think you guys can see this. Under here, local revenues, as you can see, roughly 880,000 we have budgeted for that. Most of the restricted grants are located here, which would be the HOG 1 and 2, any amounts of PTO that was received, K Foundation as well, and then the remainder here, most of that, all of that is the after school program revenues. So bottom line here on the revenue side, as you can see where we started out before, 4.14 million, 54 million, remain roughly unchanged through the first interim. But here again, a slight uptick, 4434, recognizing a little bit more of the PCSGP money. Let's talk about some of the expenditures and what needed to be done. So I went ahead and I scrubbed the staffing, to reflect as accurately as possible, what's happening within the program in terms of staff, et cetera, et cetera. And I can certainly share with you guys the staffing makeup, once we get to that portion of it. That's on a separate sheet, because that's not necessarily relevant to this conversation here. But I did scrub that staffing. So the staffing that's reflected here is actually what's going on within the school in the various categories. And as you can see here, these are your certificated salaries. So your classroom, your administration, and then some more support staff there as well. Classified salaries, same, your instructional aides, classroom related. Then you have your various support staff here as well in terms of admin, supervisors, and things like that. 1.24 on 1.32, excuse me, on class certificated salaries, another $1,085,000 on classified support salaries. Benefits, obviously, these are related to salaries, $514,000. Here's where the rubber met the road in terms of the overall cost of the program, and my alert to you guys back in, say, November, December on this. So if you take a look at where this original budget was, roughly $311,000, right? And that kind of remained unchanged, as I mentioned, at the first interim. But as you can see here from our actuals, right, if you take a look at these actuals here through January, we had already completely blown through that 311,000. So it was necessary, it was a must that we put an uptick in the budgeted amounts for this category. So they roughly added 335,401 to this category here, and that came through a number of if you will, forecasting measures in terms of forecasting actuals, and then taking that and then saying, well, if we already know that we either had over budgeted in that area of that budget line item was no longer needed, and then those things were then shifted within those categories or eliminated. So that's what made up or comprised this 335,000 that you see there in terms of the uptick in the program costs.
So, Delano, the non-capitalized,
Yes.
is that the PCs, laptops?
Yeah, so that would be inclusive of any PCs that were purchased by the school, and that's and Glenn, maybe the secondary piece of that. I know there was a conversation about some equipment being donated. I don't know exactly where that is, but those are not reflected here.
Okay.
So, but yeah, these are actual PCs and other furniture, fixtures, anything else purchased by the school.
So the big piece, Delano, right, is we had 103,000 for really core school books, and we ended up with 330,000, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Right, but we all knew going in that we decided to purchase those books up front because they are basically supplying us those books now for over a 3-year window, right? Versus having to purchase them year over year.
Yes, and correct me if I'm wrong, there may be a little bit more than that. I believe, and I think Stephen or Michael could chime into this. I believe did you guys purchase a 1-year subscription for those, or was that a actual 3-year subscription? I think there's more than just that. There's other curriculum costs in there as well too, but the majority of it is related to that. Yes.
The one thing I do want to point out is with the forecasted new budget of books and supplies of $650,000, we are running at $20,000 per student. So that's something, if that's the run rate going next year, we do need to account for that. So a deeper discussion needs to be had. Is
Right.
that the accurate?
Yeah.
That's $20,000 per student, which is
Right, and that's a little bit misleading, because and I shouldn't say misleading to you, Ethan, in that way. It's misleading in terms of someone seeing that and go, oh, wow, 20,000 per student, that's great, right? But quite a bit of that is being generated from that after school program, right? And so if you were to sort of zero out those costs, then obviously that per student amount will come down probably exponentially.
Okay.
Yeah,
Wait,
so
Ethan,
just
is
something
it-
that, you know,
Ethan,
just
is
something
it
to take.
20,000 or is it 2,000?
The 2,000. I'm sorry, 2,000. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you had an extra zero.
2,000. I'm sorry. Peter, you're absolutely correct.
And then sort of dropping down here. So again, you know, you can sort of see the trajectory going across in terms of, you know, where we started, where we budgeted, and then where we had to, you know, where the actuals are in terms of, you know, these numbers here are real, right?
Mhm.
These numbers are very real. On the operational side, again, same thing here. Just sort of taking a look at where, you know, we had budgeted, and again, you know, a budget in June, you know, sort of still remaining here in September, October versus, you know, months down the road, you can sort of see where we went and looked at actuals and said, yes, you know, these things are transpiring, these things are not, you know, so let's make our adjustments accordingly. So we were able to save about 71,000 here from the original budget or first interim budget to where we currently are here. And obviously, you know, we'll take the depreciation expenditures at the end of the year. We'll sort of take a look at those. Is that a question? No.
Okay.
And I'll drop down to page 8. And so we'll sort of look at where we land and where we wound up, right? So originally we had projected roughly, what am I looking at here? It's my net income. 92,000 in net income for this year. We're now projecting about 46,000, I'm sorry, 139,000 in net income. And that's because of just the uptick in the, you know, what we received from the PCSGP grant, and then also from the after school revenues as well.
Delano, I have a question. I failed to ask earlier. Is that net income based upon both the restricted and unrestricted income? Or
Yes.
is that only?
So if you look here,
recognized?
if you look here, Ethan, just at these two lines here, if you net those two together, so that will be the restricted, and this would be the unrestricted.
Restricted. Right.
Mm-hmm. And then again, you know, as we go through the course of the year, and when we close the books for this year, you know, we will make sure that we zero out you know, any expenditures on the restricted side that needs to be zeroed out, right? So because we don't want to have any type of excess there. So, you know, these dollars may shift, you know, some back here this way, right? Because the goal here is to have this at zero in terms of any restricted expenses and revenues that come in.
Delano, I know in the prior, I think in the previous finance committee meeting, you did ask for clarity in some of the documentation from such donors of the timeline of when the funds needs to be used by as a result of zeroing out.
Yes.
Can you recall which of donors have responded back and make so you can understand?
I would have to check internally to see what we've received. Offhand, I would not be able to answer that. I do know it is something though that we, you know, most importantly for you guys to know as well, right? Because it's important for you guys to know, you know, timing for these things, because that's important, especially if you have obligations to report back to donors or provide reports or just an update, right? And even just to your stakeholders as well. We'll double check that, but normally most of that will come to the school in turn. You know, if the funds were delivered to the school or transferred to the school, usually there's something that comes with that in terms of, you know, what the requirements for the funds are or how you can spend them, etc. But I can certainly work with admin to button that up because it is. And I think for the most part, if it was not stated, then obviously, you know, we'll lean toward the amounts, we only recognize the amounts for that year that we have expenditures for. So that way the rest of it will then just be unearned revenues for that year. All righty, so sort of looking at the balance sheet section of this, and I neglected to say this up front with this report, that it has several sections to it. What we just went through was more or less just the P&L, the profit and loss statement. And then down in this section now, we're looking more at the balance sheet and the components of the balance sheet, which starts right about here. And again, it's forgive me, it's not easy to present this on a screen like this. It doesn't give you the clarity, or at least you can't see all of the report in one shot. So we're projected based on these actuals to, let me start over.
Delano, give me 1 minute. Oh, can everybody go on mute? Give me 1 minute, Delano. I'm scrolling.
We're fine. It happens. I love to hear the kids' voices anyways.
Please.
So when the school initially opened, and I'm going to keep this here to, put my eye on this, there was transactions and business that occurred before July 1, right? That's what's really reflected right here, right? So essentially, you sort of began the fiscal year with this deficit of $55,000, but that's to be expected, right? Because at that point in time, the school had zero resources. There was not. It started with nothing, right? And so, if Michael and Stephen and Doug certainly can recall this back in the February, March, April, just about a year ago, right? When this thing was still in its infancy, long before the success, right? When we were sort of building, the internal pieces to this, you guys can recall, what those days look like. So again, here, this is kind of what we shouldn't say forced, but we had to record, the beginning balance as of July 1. So this is where it was at that point in time. If you sort of take in where we are in terms of our current deficit, right? And it's natural. I'm going to go back to the net income really quickly. It's perfectly normal to have a deficit at the first interim, right? Because your revenues are trailing so far behind you. And certainly I can, provide that clarity in another meeting on the revenue streams and the revenue timelines and how those are allocated, et cetera. But just know this, that the goal is at the end of the year, when you close the books, that you are positive. And that's what we're saying here with this 139 that's over here. But as of January 31, your fund balance was deficit. Your net income was minus $2,900. Very small, as you can see, for an operation of this size. I'm quite pleased with that, to be quite honest with you, overall. Because it's very rare that even, for a charter school of this size, especially with the amount of moving parts that you have, that this deficit isn't higher. I'm quite happy for that. So if you add, where we started this fiscal year, and you put back in this deficit, again, it's projecting here. Right now we have a deficit of $86,363. That's the entire fund balance, right? Projecting over here, we're going to finish, and this is just an estimated, right? Roughly 56,228, right? So that's still positive, although not by, what I would consider the standards of your authorizer, which they would like you to be about 73,840, not too far off. And we're hoping that our projected net income is higher at the end of the year. And again, if we stay within that budget, or below it, chances are that we will. But that's what will drive up this projected ending fund balance right here of 56,000 to this $73,000, which is kind of the minimum reserve that they expect you to have. And again, that's not all total cash, right? This is just the net of your assets and your liabilities, inclusive of cash and any other debts that you have. The net of that is that. So that's what we're looking at here. Let's drop down a little bit, if you guys are still with me, and we'll look at some of the ending components of the fund balance here, right? So as of January 31, you had $37,000 in the treasury. You had another $685,000 in the operating bank account. You had roughly $13,000 in prepaid expenditures. Net all of that together, you had roughly about $736,000 in total assets. As far as liabilities concerned, you have $121,000 in payables. You had another $507,000 in loans. And again, these are the receivable sales and the charter school revolving loan of $250,000. All right, so you owe a portion of charter school's capital and then $250,000 for the revolving loan. The revolving loan, you won't start making payments on that until roughly, I venture to say September of this year. If not, then I'll definitely will find out and make sure that we account for that by P1. So maybe by January of next year, those payments will start.
Yeah. And Delano, that interest rate's pretty small.
Extremely small, very, very low interest rate. In fact, it's probably the best loan going, although it's only $250,000. Yeah, extremely low interest rate. It's definitely worth its weight in gold, so to speak.
Delano, before you
Yes.
go further, there's something that I think the entire committee should hear. Clearly last time I did mention about we would like to reduce or minimize the use of expensive money, specifically
Yes.
hard money, factoring money, which clearly we needed to get the operations going. But with the school possibly expanding next year, we'll see where the enrollment. Delano, based upon the current finances that you see, do you think we need to seek factoring money again in anticipation for next year?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ethan. I will give you the short answer, which is probably and more likely, right? Because once we start looking at the budget for next year and diving into that, one of the first questions that comes up with me will be, is there growth, right? And if the answer to that most likely will be yes, then we're going to have to, obviously growth of that, sort and type will require more additional resources. And as we know that as you go into the summer months, you're going to have to sort of have cash on hand to be able to bring those resources long before the student shows up. You have to hire staff, et cetera, things like that, more technology and all the things that you would need for the classroom. So there will be an investment potentially. And again, I'm going to use that because, we have to be strategic about borrowing when we do it and how much, et cetera. And we can certainly, we'll talk about those things. But there is it's very likely that we'll have to do that type of investment into the program again. But again, for us, we know that there is a place where, this thing will flatten out. And usually for most charter schools, is roughly around an 18-month cycle. If you sort of factor in, the growth over the next year, the amount of revenues that you will receive, because the thing with this, obviously you're going to pay back $200 and something thousand to them, right? But you're not going to get anything back, right? You're just really paying back what you borrowed from them, right? So it's a cash flow issue at some point. So we want to make sure that the timing of that is such that, we have enough cash, operating cash, to sustain the school while paying that back. But at the same time, this is very tricky because at the same time, we're looking down the road and saying, yeah, we need to invest into the program. So we may need to borrow, right? But we want to be strategic, excuse me. We want to be strategic about that to make sure that we only borrow what we need, right? Which is, roughly 80% of any number that we can throw out there. I'll say let's just take 80% of that, right? But that will be something that we will discuss as part of the budget for next year. Because to your point, Ethan, hard money is very expensive. as we look at the deferred revenue, and again, the deferred revenue here, so if you recall,
好啊，那个还有就是那个什么，你说只剩礼拜六是不是？
so if you recall, I had mentioned that the school received, restricted revenues, right? So whether it's donations, etc. So what you're seeing here is $193,000 of unearned revenue, meaning revenues that we've received, but we have not incurred any expenses related to that yet, right? So we treat it here as a liability. Once we've incurred those expenses, then it gets reclassified, or the portion of those expenses that we recognize gets reclassified from here, right? So we hope, and to your point, Ethan, earlier about how we're tracking it, right? So as we go through the course of the year, if there are expenditures that, that will be bump up against this, then it will certainly be done. And, you guys have seen, and I can certainly share, you guys can post this on your website as well, the revenues and expenses by resource, because it sort of lays everything out really nicely in terms of what revenues you guys have received and what expenses are related to that. So really good for transparency purposes. Bottom lining this here, 823,000 in liabilities. You subtract that from our 736,000 in total assets, leaves us again as of January 31 with a deficit fund balance of 86,363. Again, perfectly normal for a charter school in its first year. And again, as I mentioned, even for most schools that are long established, it's okay to have a deficit at this point during the year, because again, as I mentioned, the timing of your revenues and things like that coming in are far slower, and they're trailing your expenses, which are much more consistent throughout the course of the year. That is the overall second interim report and budget. And as I talked about the budget, I also want to talk about the cash flow, as I mentioned before. And you can sort of see here what we have projected. I'll sort of make this a little bit bigger. But again, the problem is it sort of runs off the page and you can't see it. But as you can see where we started in terms of cash, and I mentioned before, even though we have a deficit fund balance, you do have some cash, right? You can see the cash flow here throughout the course of the year and what we have projected. But again, this is predicated on some borrowing and things like that that are built into this model, right? But this is again here for sustainability and things like that. And again, we only borrow what we need, right? So that's one of the blessings with charter schools capital. We can squeeze the trigger only on the amounts that we need. Couple of other things on this report, sort of gives you some breaks out some of the professional services by object code and how they're being spent. You can see here the budget for that, and then the actuals related to some of those, where those expenditures are. Again, this is just another tool for the authorizer to sort of take a look into some of the key areas within the organization that are not necessarily personnel in terms of your own staff, but usually your consultants and other items. Special ed is one that I can see here, your fiscal services, your authorizer fees, your IT services, just to name a few, things like that. And then lastly, but not least, just some general assumptions about the school. In terms of attendance, you can see what we have projected here in terms of the next couple of years, our funding rates, things like that.
Hey, Delano, the ADA
Yes.
percentage, has that been pretty firm with what you're seeing through first actuals?
So we will get that next pulse. So the ADA, the pulse check on the ADA, because I don't check. I normally, unless there's a major reason, there's really not any reason for me to do this. I check ADA roughly twice per year, which is at the P1, which is December, and again in April at P2. That P2 number is the most critical and the most important, because that's really what all of the revenues that I just mentioned are based on. Right, so they're really only accurate as of that number. So that is the number that will then determine what your true funding for the fiscal year is. Right, so as you know, Glenn, your ADA will fluctuate up and down. Especially in the last couple of years, COVID and whatnot, and then obviously just a normal life, with children, right? They get sick, they catch a cold, they have a doctor's appointment, something like that, or they just don't feel like going to school that day, whatever the case may be, right? But we're hoping that when we take the P2 ADA, that it's right around this number right here. Okay. Right. And it's roughly 95%, but if this number is higher, right, then we'll take that as well too, because a higher percentage down here obviously will increase this number here, which would generate more revenues.
And those school numbers, Dawn, are those are accurate as of today? Is that correct?
These numbers here, when I say accurate, remember these are budgeted numbers, right? So the way that the funding works is that what it is today doesn't really make a difference. It only makes a difference come April 15th, when this number, whatever the ADA is, that's the number that I would like to see be at least 328.7 or higher.
Okay, understand.
Yeah.
But
So we'll know in about a month or so, we'll know what the true ADA for 21-22 is, right? So, because that's measured as of April 15th. The pulse check that I mentioned earlier is as of December 15th. And that's just to give you an idea, hey, did we, are we on track? Or are we, because you're sort of comparing that to, last year's number, if you were, in year 2. Right. So that's one of the reasons why I look at that way. But really and truly, the April 15th P2 number, that is the number that we're hoping to be this or higher.
Okay. And then the ones for 22-23, that's a forecast of currently students coming back and future new students. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. This is all mere speculation here.
Okay.
That is the interim in budget in a nutshell. I want to show you just one more.
Delano, I do have one question regarding
Yes.
the charter school assumption, the page you're on. So KFF is 140. The first Hogue Foundation was for 50,000. Does this include the Hogue Foundation number 2 for 70?
No, it doesn't. And I can go ahead and drop this in here. Drop the H2 in here.
Okay.
And probably and depending on the timing of when that came in, I may just go ahead and reflect all of the, because the PTO sort of came in after the fact. There are a couple of other, let me double check really quick. So I'm not saying something incorrect. The PTO and the H2, as I'm calling it, the Helen and Larry and Helen Hogue Foundation Grant 2. Those two I'll drop in there, so that will sort of bump that number up to reflect.
Is this fundraising the jogathon?
Oh, you guys can see this? I believe so.
Okay. Is this,
Where do you guys see that? Where do you see that?
it's on the very bottom. So
It says fundraising.
Oh, you're looking at this. Yeah. Yeah. The fundraising is inclusive of everything. So it's like, the jogathon, whatever other fundraising elements that the school has engaged in or will engage in before the school year is up, that's what's reflected there.
okay.
Right. So this is the second interim report in a nutshell. And again, it just sort of goes over a couple of things in terms of staffing and things like that. And I'll go ahead and close this. I want to show you, if there are no more questions on this particular report, I'll go ahead and share with you guys this one. And you guys can see this one now?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. So this is, I showed you the bigger report first because I wanted you to have context. So now I'm going to show you just the, and again, we're not going to go back through the numbers again, but just wanted to show you. So this is the budget without all the other stuff in it, right?
Yeah.
And then comparing it to the 2 out years here, which I said, obviously are conversation pieces that we will have starting this month. So I just wanted you to see the budget that you're going to approve here. And again, as I mentioned, what the revenues are, the expenses.
Delano, can I slip in a quick question?
Absolutely. Is that
Is
Doug?
yeah, procedurally then, this committee will approve the budget and make a recommendation to the larger board tonight to approve the second interim budget. Is that how we should?
Yes, this body will bless this, and the larger board will give it the stamp of approval. I'm walking through it here in more detail just so that, you know, at the board meeting, you know, there really isn't time to spend that amount of, you know, to have a detailed walkthrough. So, you know, I've already walked through this with Ethan today, and I'm walking through with the rest of the committee members, and then obviously, you know, with you guys in agreement, you know, any discussion there is more or less, you know, about any of the moving parts without having to go back through the entire document again.
Delano, before, so I'm thinking you're jumping to the next document as we're preparing for the, is that the first draft for the next year's budget? Is that
No. What I did was basically, you're going to approve the second interim report along with the budget, and I just wanted to show you guys that without all the other, you know, it was a busy report that I showed you before, but I just wanted to show you this green column, which is the new budget now that we'll have the rest of this fiscal year.
Yeah.
Right. So I just wanted to sort of keep it in context to make sure you guys see it separately here. And again, like, these are just projections out for out years. And again, you know, like I said, these are all subject to change. Year 2 and 3 are subject to change. But this is what we're going to approve tonight as the operating budget for the rest of the remainder of the year.
Delano, may I inquire? So right now, our net anticipated net income based upon the second interim budget is
that number there
is going to be
the 139,974.
Perfect. Okay, and those are considered
well, it's a combination of both. If you look here, so you'll see that there's 101,000 in unrestricted net income dollars, and then 38,000 in restricted dollars. And again, as I mentioned, when we close out the year, if it's necessary to, you know, to unrestrict some of this or add more expenditures over here, for whatever reason, you know, we can certainly do that if it fits within, you know, those restricted categories. But for now, as of January 31st, or, you know, it's projected to look like this at the end of the year.
Delano, I do have a question regarding the, let's focus on the unrestricted interim budget. You know, the restricted has some moving parts to it.
Yes.
If it's so, it looks like there's going to be a positive net position of $101,000. From the
not net position, this is just the P&L section right here.
P&L,
so this is just net income.
The net income.
Your position will be down here.
Where this is quite healthy, you know, given from all the finance committee meetings prior. Where did it come from?
Where did
the increase? I believe it's been the increase.
Yeah. So as I said, you know, most the PCSGP grant came, you know, the timing of that is what's helping these numbers here, right? So if you're looking at what I did with revenue, so, you know, remember we had to sort of move things around, number one, and we're not too far off because the original net income was $92,000, right? And so it just a slight uptick of 139,000. But with the scrubbing of the salaries and benefits and getting those more in line, right? Because again, we were using, you know, projections based on certain things, right? And so now we have more information. We're able to scrub those pieces, and then obviously with areas within the 5,000 series that we knew were not going to come to fruition. You know, as I mentioned, you can't see it on this one because it's not, you don't see that comparison. But you know, there were areas here within, you know, these line items that, you know, they were high. The budget amounts were high. So we brought those numbers down. Then obviously we had to increase up here. So the net of all that was a difference here that you see. So the 139 minus the 92, somebody got quick math, what's 39 and 8? 47, so an uptick of about 47,000 in net income.
Yeah, Delano, to follow up with that question, is the catch up due to simply a timing of revenue recognition, or is it more because the costs were front loaded in the first couple of months to half year the calendar year?
If I'm understanding your question, Peter, are you talking about the actuals or the budgeted side of things here? Because I think you
the end of the year budget at the 139, is it because we're catching up with revenue, or is it because the costs, the actual costs have been front loaded?
Right. So a little bit of both here, and let me see if I can answer it this way. So we recognize roughly, and then let me jump all the way back up here so you guys can see this really quickly. We recognize roughly, initially we had budgeted to recognize 270,000 in PCSGP funds, but we're actually going to recognize 394,000. Right? So that's, help me here. That's almost 120,000 more.
Delano, if I can ask that question, the PCB, I can never say that. The
PCSGP, yeah.
PCSG. That I believe it's a total of $600,000, right? Over a period of 3 years.
Yeah. And as you can see, as a result of that, I had to lower in the out years, reduce down those amounts that we're going to receive, because we got more this year, right, than I'd originally anticipated we're going to get, right? So that was a blessing in disguise anyways, right? So that came in, and then, I said, well, we'll stick it in the budget because it's, it certainly helps, even though it's money in, money out, but it helps the revenue numbers, if you will, right? Because and also when we're cutting the expenses as well, we're able to shift a lot more over to the PCSGP because a lot of those items did qualify for it, right? So it was a blessing in disguise that way. So it's a combination of both things, the uptick in revenues and then, the cut in some of the expenditures and shift in expenditures. Does that help, Peter?
Yeah, thank you. And this might be unrelated too, but in year 2 and year 3, does that incorporate us paying back the loan that we currently owe, the 250?
On here, it does not, because again, this is just a projection here. And so what, when we look at your cash flow, on a long-term basis, you can see where we would have paid that back, depending on how much we borrow. So no, this fund balance just sort of takes into consideration, your net income here, and then adding back in your fund, your beginning fund balance.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Let's see what else. And again, as I mentioned, this is just a cash flow related to that. And then just the rest of these. So this is the trimmed down version of that report. It's only 6 pages long, but I just wanted you guys to see the budget and what we have projected in terms of, how we intend to finish up the year. Again, because I'm more focused on, what's the bottom line going to be come 6/30 in terms of revenues over expenses, right? Because that helps certainly our position going forward, and certainly helps decision making when we can have a positive ending fund balance, as opposed to a deficit to end the year and start the year.
Ethan, what's the are we going to present this portion of this at the board meeting next for board approval?
The answer should be yes, if there's been no material changes being done. We originally allowed for a little bit. This report needs to be submitted to our authorizer on March 15th. Hence, we scheduled for today to give to have adequate time to discuss and make changes if need be. Delano, if you can help me walk me through this one, maybe a different way to say this the net income of this year based upon interim budget of $140,000. Clearly, so right now we are projected based upon, the school is projected to have a profit of $140,000. $40,000.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes. Mhm.
And of that, $100,000 is unrestricted,
Mhm.
and about $40,000 come from restricted.
Correct. And again, that's projected, right? So,
Projected.
I want to make sure we put the emphasis on
Agreed.
those words, because, between now and when we close the books, a lot can transpire and a lot can happen. But if we, and as I mentioned to you today, this is the game plan. So if you guys were a coach and you gave me the playbook and the game plan for the game, if I followed it to a T, we win, right? I audible and call my own plays and do my own thing. Things can go south. But that is the plan. Any other questions on the interim? I know it's a lot to digest, and don't worry, you guys will be seeing this report. If you stick around here long enough, you're gonna be seeing these quite a bit, because they come up twice per year. You'll see another unaudited. Excuse me, talking too much. You will see the unaudited actuals, which are the next set of compliance reports that we'll do, and those will come up in September again. So that's the interim and the budget.
Okay.
Wonderful. Are there any questions from the other members regarding this? Peter, Glenn, Doug?
I'm good.
I'm good.
Nice work pulling together. I saw you worked some pretty late hours this week. So I appreciate it.
I almost forgot one thing, and I want to share this with you guys really, really quickly. And because I said I would. And I'll just grab it really quickly just so you guys can see this. This is just the staffing makeup. And I want you guys to just kind of see, so that way you have an idea, in terms of what, the school looks like from a salary and benefits perspective, right? And again, here, the out years, those are things that we're going to discuss and address, right? As you can see here, roughly about 16.45 FTEs for your certificated positions, another 28.25 in terms of your classified. And again, here you can see the salaries and benefits, but just wanted to show this to you to see what the actual benefits costs, in terms of salary and benefits for the school year over year, right? Again, we're just focused on this year. So roughly about 2.4 million in salaries, and then you add in another 514,000 in benefits, roughly costing almost 30 million in staffing. So again, just wanted to point that out, share that with you guys, just so you're aware.
Delano and I have been going into detail about that. So thank you, Delano.
All right, that's all I've got, folks. I'll shut my mic off.
Well, first of all, Delano, thank you so much. You've been an absolutely invaluable resource. You and Janice has been working tirelessly and giving complete and accurate information. And I'm still taking time to fully digest and wrap our head, and really appreciate the level of detail and granularity that we need to make proper recommendations and approvals.
Absolutely. It's, I will definitely, walk with you guys. You guys are a fun group to work with. This is not something, that you can easily just wrap your head around with in one swing. So, we'll take as much time as we need and go at a pace that you guys like. And, as long as we continue to push forward with it, the understanding will come. So.
As a point, and I believe I forgot procedurally, should we be asking for committee for approval? I cannot remember that. Was it before or after a decision, or before or right as the discussion was starting?
So I think you asked for a motion.
Are there
we can do it now.
comments?
Public comments should probably come before the vote.
The motion. Okay.
Does anybody have any public comments? We'll open it up, and if you can raise your hand or unmute yourself.
That one, Polly.
Hi, my name is Polly. I'm a parent of an after-school program kid, and my son is in 3rd grade. I know you have surplus in the after-school program tuition per se. I just wonder if you could budget some money back to Wonder Kids to improve this program. I know different grades have different needs, but the one thing that I could see is the homework help. I know when the school first started, the goal is to have the kids to finish their homework, but I could see my son did finish most of the homework, but he came home with most of the answer incorrect. So I don't think there is routine to help the kids to check homeworks. It may be the kids are reluctant to show their works, or it also could be the teacher to student ratios are too high. And during after school, my son would tell me a lot of the time the teacher would just designate their energy to do crowd control. And then maybe one or two students may have questions, and the teacher would designate their energy to help them. So I just wonder if there's surplus, could you hire more TA or helper, whatever, especially for the upper graders. So when they grow up to the 4th grade and 5th grade, I think their homework load and help would increase rather than just playing or learning other extracurricular activity for the lower grades. And then the quality of the teachers will also require more. So at the beginning of the school year, I noticed whatever the teacher helped the kids, especially in math, they were wrong solutions as well. So the teachers, after school teachers may not have enough time to prepare. They don't have enough time to help the kids to check their homeworks while they're rushing to finish their homework. This is some of the problems that I've observed. So I think this could be solved by designating some salaries or, to increase lower the teacher's student ratio to hire more person to help. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Polly. Any other comments? At this time, if there's no further comments, I'd like to ask for a motion to approve the second interim budget.
I motion it.
Ethan seconds. All in favor? Peter?
Okay. Aye.
Glenn?
Aye.
Doug?
Yes.
Ethan, aye. Motion passes, and we will take this to the board meeting, which will occur very soon. Moving on to the next agenda. This is now more a discussion item. This is regarding the after school Wonder Kids. We have actually heard a couple parents speak about this program. This topic it's been going on. We have heard successes, we have heard some challenges, and just like it to bring it to the finance committee as some discussion points. As again, this after school will require the more will not only require the curriculum committee but also the administration. So since we last spoken, the treasury flow of this after school has changed from what I understand on January the 1st. It has moved from the parent paying the school directly. And then for outside vendors such as OCMD, the IIA is actually paying OCMD. And so this now number two, there needs to be some discussions as I've discovered some information about, clearly with after school, there's been for how do we address those children who are on reduced or free lunch right now projected around 18 children. So financially, how's that done? And then, the third is really thinking about, the after school program, also known as Wonder Kids, is within the same entity of IIA. So there's no two separate entities, it's one legal entity. And the idea is, should the profit from the after school be considered restricted or unrestricted for the use of the schools? And so those are discussions that needs to be had. And let's see. And also, to really think about the different program offerings and what was the cost benefit analysis. Again, that's more of a curriculum committee that needs to spearhead and along with side administration. But I was reviewing all the different programs. Let me tell you, it's a lot of different programs. There is quite a bit of logistics needed to manage staffing as well as also just how to present the information to parents, which they're, and so just want to see, again, a feel for what everybody thinks about regarding after school. Peter, you're also a parent yourself, and maybe just as an open discussion about the after school program in itself.
Ethan, I'll share what concerns some parents have raised with me. One is if the amount that we charge for the after-school program generates revenues in excess of our direct expenses, the question comes, should that money then be considered for next year's pricing to reduce the pricing? Okay, that's a good tension to manage. We heard a mom of one or two children, they say that it's a bit of a burden on her. So I think that's something that policy-wise, the board can consider. How do we meet the needs of the broad spectrum of income levels? And second issue I think that was raised was, does the after-school program pay rent to
overhead? Yep.
Right, we're one entity, but is there a debit memo or anything? And right now there's not, but I think those are the good tensions to manage. We don't want to overcharge, but we recognize that the after-school program can provide much desired enrichment, much needed childcare, and the blend of those two, I think, gives the impetus to charge a reasonable fee. It's just finding that right sweet spot and making sure all can participate who desire. That's the issues I'm weighing out right now. Glenn, Peter, any issues come your way that you're wondering about with Wonder Kids after school?
I think that makes sense.
Education is big. Go ahead, Glenn.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I'd like to keep, if we have excess revenue that's coming out of Wonder Kids, I think it should stay in Wonder Kids, right? Whether it's to reduce the rate or bring in different facilities or teachers or support to enrich Wonder Kids, I think it needs to stay there. I think we could, if the main school doesn't need the money for rent, which it sounds like we don't, right? Then I think they should stay as Wonder Kids money. That's my thought.
No, I think you're right. There's always soft dollars for overhead.
Yeah,
janitorial.
we're talking 3 or 4 hours, right? So it's not like the main. It's not like IUSD is charging us anymore to stay until 7 o'clock at night, right?
That's the real benefit, isn't it?
Right, it's just the lights, right? It's the lights. It's the HVAC costs, heating costs. That's really the key benefit of it, and it's the admin staff that I think what Edith is bringing up is that we need to make sure we have a good admin program around it, because it sounds like it's a very complex program with lots of parts.
One consideration, Peter, excuse me, but let me jump in. One consideration was if there's any money flowing back to the school operation itself, then the money proceeds has to be for dual benefit. So generally, it will be for capital expenditures that can benefit both the school hours as well as the after school Wonder Kids. That's a consideration. Again, this is an open discussion. But
so
Peter,
in that example, like if we needed, for example, more PCs, not that it's just, I'm using that as an example, and that Wonders Kids was using it and the main school was using it, that would be an idea where you share those funds across.
In concept, yes. But some of those could even be, very, could be territorial. Then one of the ideas is the capital expend, but anything that can be shared by both groups, it's that's when the school gets used.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt. I think Annie is raising her hand. Annie,
we are not.
Yeah, we're not.
We are not. There's no decision being made
okay.
right now. This is just going to be a discussion.
Oh, but it's just a comment. Or no? Okay.
But Annie, please email me, or we're going to talk about it. I'm looking to have a more or propose from the finance committee side to recommend to the other committees as well as administration our thoughts about the after school program before it gets solidified and memorialized and communicate to the parents before next year. Because I know there's been quite a bit of turbulence this year, which I thank everybody for.
I just have a comment about what you're just talking about. It's just that I know that you guys say that the Wonder Kids, they come in literally right after school. So a lot of times they kick out the current teachers, but at most public schools, the teachers stay back and they grade their papers. So they are taking up regular, school time, because sometimes the teachers stay back and answer some questions of the students or parents. So, I mean, that was just my only thing. It's just that, the teachers all get kicked out and they can't, use their rooms after. So, I mean, it is kind of taking from the school.
Annie, much appreciated. I did see some correspondence regarding that. That requires a little bit of operations as well. Totally, I understand. I am starting to understand the logistics of what's occurring at the school. And so again, this requires multiple parties. It requires administration to really get a grasp on this. But from the finance side, we're looking at programs and we're making sure there's adequate compensation. There's number of staff, what type of programs, what type of hours, and making sure it's being run financially prudent. But Peter, sorry, my apologies. Do you have any comments?
I'll be quick, and I sympathize and I understand the comments from the two moms earlier. I think there's a couple of things. Number one is we should, take a look at ways that we can enhance the value, right? The parents are paying for a reason. It's not just daycare. It's help them to learn more and to really come home having to finish your homework and be ahead for the next day. And I think that's really, really important. The second point is, I'm assuming at the beginning of the year, we did some kind of, competitive analysis, taking a look at programs like Rainbow Rising to take a look at what people are charging. So I'm assuming that at the end of this year, we can take a look at our surplus and then determine if we want to normalize rates. And then number three, I do think that, even though we're the same entity, from an accounting perspective, I do believe, again, people might disagree, that there should be some kind of rent attributed to the program, right? Because if it was another program, they would probably pay the same thing, right? Again, I'm making some assumptions I might not understand, but I think the first year is going to be a little bit off in different areas, but hopefully by the second year we can catch up.
Well, wonderful. And, definitely that's something, the overhead, there's some indirect personnel that's also personnel from the school that's assisting in the afternoon. And these are things we should consider and propose as we're and help maybe give it a little bit clearer picture of the actual financials of the after school. But nevertheless, it's exciting.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that on paper it looks like, hey, after school program is overcharging, et cetera. I just want to make sure that we are laying across the correct assumptions, right? Because I don't know if that's the case today. But if we increase the value and then we attribute certain accounting rules, maybe it starts to level out to a more reasonable, P&L.
Ethan?
Michael, please go ahead.
Just as a point, we are asking $700 a month approximately for Wonder Kids now, a little bit less. Comparable programs are charging $1,000 to $1,200. So we are a bargain compared to other programs in the city, just for a fact. Kara can give more details. She's on top of that.
I think that would be helpful if we get Kara to come back with an analysis for the finance committee on comparables in the region, right?
I have been speaking to her, and we have gone through a little bit of an overview of high-level numbers, number of students, payroll, staff, hours, programs, and just really get a grasp. So again, so we can have a more thoughtful, and a little bit more time this time, and receive input from everybody regarding the after school. But by gosh, it's been a successful program thus so far. And kudos to all those who have worked on it. In the interest of time, just like to go to the next discussion item. This one is one sentence. This is regarding the next year's fiscal budget. This is going to be the first interim, no, the first draft of the fiscal year 22-23 budget will be due in July, in mid-June to our authorizer. We will be working on that. I'm gonna call you out, Peter, but Peter and I are starting that tomorrow and just really reviewing the budget and just taking the time so that we can present as a subcommittee to the overall committee. As there's just a lot of information to digest this next few months. And the intent really is to create budgets. Delano, let's get back to is to really refine the budgets so that we all understand that this is not just a random where's numbers coming from. There are thought behind it. Delano, I see you have your hands raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little point of clarity and some timeline to the budget process. So as soon as the administration sort of finalizes the enrollment, and I believe that there may be some lottery going on at the moment and whatnot. So as soon as that gets finalized and we sort of get an idea of what the potential and possible enrollment will be for next year, that's really the jumping off point for us in terms of the conversation, because nothing starts without knowing how many students you're going to have, because all of your revenues are derived mostly from that. So once we get that, then we can start to have that conversation about building next year's budget based upon obviously some of the actuals from this year, and then also the long-term plan for the school and things like that. So those are things that will come up in that conversation. The timeline here is that we will present back to this body a preliminary budget. I want to put my marker on April/May, right? So that, because that will give time for this body to sort of do some of the legwork in terms of having the conversations that needs to be had, etc. And then as we get into May, June, we're bringing back that final draft. But there's a lot of layers that are involved when I say that, because for compliance purposes, like your LCAP and some other documents, which are, the budget's layered within those documents. So we essentially sort of have to build both of those things at the same time. So that's why we're going to need a couple of months to get it done and get it done correctly.
Thank you, Delano. Thank you for letting everybody know on this committee. At this time, in the interest of time and preparation for this next meeting, are there any other moving on? Are there any other committee recommendations? Wonderful. I'd like to motion closure to this meeting.
Second.
Ethan motions and then Glenn seconds. I'd like to roll call. Peter.
Aye.
Doug.
Yes.
Glenn.
Aye.
Ethan motions aye, and we are now closed for today's finance committee meeting. Wonderful.
Probably
Thank you
need
all.
to shut down the conference, right? So we can save this file.
Yes.
Okay.
Sai, can you stop recording?
Yes.